$3 extra a month, and then you can get like you can then like legally password share, right? You can actually add an account away from your household. And if you're on a premium subscription, depending on which, some of the countries are doing different things, but on some of the countries, they're going to let you, for if you have like if you have a premium subscription, they'll allow you even to add more households away from your own household. So that's what they're attempting to do. I don't know when it's going to roll out in the US. In terms of the subscriber numbers, they were, some people thought they might lose 2 million subscribers in the quarter we just ended. They only lost 970,000. I'm not exactly surprised by that, because there was a lot of people who really follow it know that Stranger Things was doing really, really well. And the way that they rolled out Stranger Things, which is the best viewed, this is the highest viewed English language programming they've ever had, rather than just roll out all the episodes and allow everyone to binge watch and then cancel your subscription. They rolled it out, they split it in half, so they basically you couldn't just cancel that quickly, and that seems to have worked. Now, where the on the subscriber number going forward, people they're going to, people thought in the third quarter, which is coming up, that they would add 1.8 million. They're now saying they're only going to add a million, so they cut that forecast substantially. I should point out that they actually beat on the earnings number. By the way, they beat on the earnings number last quarter, even when everyone was selling off the stock, because of the subscriber number. They beat on that number. If I had a concern about Netflix, it's not about how they determine their subscriber numbers. It would be that they have, and then everyone knows this because they've been doing this for at least over a decade. They have significant off balance sheet liabilities for their content. Nobody knows what exactly that is. So in terms of how you value the company, that becomes an issue. But that's the only kind of real accounting issue. But I do think it's always good to look how people determine subscribers, because every service does it differently, and how people determine, and companies do churn numbers. I know Peacock, which is the NBC Universal streaming service, they have a lot of free subscribers. They disclose that, by the way. They'll tell you we've got this many people watching us and this many people who got it for free because they got it through their cable system or whatever. So that's kind of the Netflix stuff, but there's plenty of information on their website, so nobody should have to guess that's that. And the other thing they mentioned, by the way, which would be interesting for this group because we're an international group, and it will be relevant to any international company. They had a 300 somewhat $1 million profit swing due to currency translations, and that was pretty big. Okay, and so look for that with any kind of American company that reports in dollars but has like big international operations like a McDonald's. You may see some really big currency swings. I never get really that alarmed by currency swings because those things go back and forth. This is where, particularly if it's dollars and euros and stuff like that, I don't that really never impacted how I really kind of value the company very much. Um, okay, so that's one thing. The other thing that was, a couple of things that were mentioned also yesterday. There was some discussion on the Celsius bankruptcy and about liquidations and Chapter 11s and all of that. I just want to clarify something that was, I mean, somebody else. Um, you can convert a chapter 11 to a chapter 7. Chapter 11 is a reorganization, chapter 7 is a liquidation. You could also do a liquidation within chapter 11. I actually chaired a creditors committee a long time ago where we actually did that. We just basically liquidated the company in a chapter 11. We didn't even convert it to a chapter 7. This issue about preference for securities, I wish Donna was here. If there's no SIPC protection, then there's nothing really special for securities other than if they're deemed to be customer deposits. Okay, and this is just any bankruptcy. It's not just if it's involving a financial firm. Customer deposits have a slight priority in a bankruptcy proceeding, but it's really slight. You have a 20 up to $2,600 is considered a priority claim over general unsecured creditors. And by the way, even that 2,600 is still subordinated to super priority claims. And a super priority claim would be if they get additional loans, post the petition, the judge can the court can classify them as a super priority, lien, so that they would get paid back first if someone's actually going to actually lend money to Celsius at this point. Who knows? But also administrative claims, legal fees, trustee fees, accounting fees, which get to be really substantial in large bankruptcy cases. Those are also, they come ahead of all other creditors, including whatever small priority you would get for a customer deposit, which again it's limited to 2,600. They have a lot of those categories, by the way, like employee salaries up to a cap have a priority over general unsecured creditors, but again, it's capped, and again, it's subordinated to those super priority claims I mentioned. So I wanted to clarify that. And the other thing I think that got mentioned was this issue about the House of Representatives and the vote on admitting Sweden and was it Sweden and Norway into NATO? Um,
Finland.
Finland.
Finland, excuse me, Finland, Sweden, and Finland. Um, that's only that resolution is basically just a resolution. It's non-binding. The House of Representatives actually has nothing to say about it. Only the Senate does, because they're treating this as a treaty. So it needs to get two-thirds vote in the Senate, and so the House of Representatives vote is just doesn't even matter. And I don't think that was not mentioned, because I think that if you don't understand sometimes how our system works here, that people get confused. But so that is a resolution usually is legally non-binding, and it's going to be a Senate vote, and they need to get two-thirds because they're going to treat it as a treaty, and only the Senate can confirm treaties. And I think that's all I had. Thanks.
Why do
For the
you?
summary, Ken.
Why would those Republican senators, or sorry, House members, um, stick their neck out in that way if it didn't? I mean, they have nothing. What? Obviously, they do it because they have something to gain, but it's not for real gain. It's just for show. Why would they?
Show their base.
Right.
To show their base that they're whatever.
It's a form of peacocking, political peacocking. I should register that.
Yeah, but I think Tyler's asking the question: why do they think that appeals to the base? Right? That's your question, right?
I'm just
Really?
surprised that there's even 17 of them that feel like that was a smart move to make.
Well, there is a contingency of the Republican Party that's isolationist. Okay, let's say someone like Rand Paul, even though he's in the Senate, which is one of the reasons I think he objected to some of the funding of going to Ukraine. So I think part of it is some of them are isolationists. Some of them are thinking that basically we're going to end up getting into World War III. So there is, I mean, the Republican Party typically everyone thinks is being, and historically it was, big on national defense and big on, foreign intervention and all of that. But there is a growing part of the Republican Party. I mean, and by the way, that's probably represented by, Donald Trump. Okay. That is not, a global, let's call it globalist, whatever you want to call it, but more isolationist. And they think we've been in too many wars, and so they don't want to be obligated. I mean, it's kind of like they're looking at it through the eyes of World War One. I mean, look what happened how we got into World War
Right.
that too, but right, that's how we're looking
So
at it.
using that thought process, wouldn't you still want Sweden and Finland in NATO? I mean, that's what they're voting on: is Sweden and Finland in NATO.
No, because what Putin wants is for NATO to be weak. So
I get that.
the pro Russia people in the Congress
That's what I'm getting at.
won't support that. Yeah.
That's what I'm getting at. Is that it's hard to argue on the initial premise of the question. Forget Russia for a second. Just completely forget Russia. The question is, should Sweden and Finland join NATO? The answer is an obvious yes. There's no reason for them not to be. It's a huge benefit to the U.S., who's part of NATO already, that Sweden and Finland join NATO. So why would you be voting against it?
Okay, I'm just going to play devil's advocate.
I know, but my point is there's other externalities
I'm going to tell you.
causing them to. Yeah, go ahead.
Tyler, the reason is they think Russia's more likely to attack Finland than France. Okay, and so they don't, and therefore they don't necessarily want to get into World War III with Russia over Finland. Okay, that's what they're basically saying. Okay, they're almost willing to cede Finland. They're almost basically saying, let Russia take Finland, or we don't think Russia's going to take Finland, so therefore we don't need to put it in NATO. This is their theory. Okay, that's the theory they're operating on. I know some of the members who voted against it. I wouldn't necessarily say that they're pro Putin as much as some of them are just. They don't want any more foreign wars, and
Got
and and they're they're more isolationists. We've
it.
always had isolationists. We had isolationists in World War II. People objected to helping England until the last minute. That was
Mhm.
controversial in World War II. I mean, if you look at the timeline in World War II,
Yep.
you know.
Yeah.
Until Pearl Harbor.
Nicholas.
Until the sinking of the Lusitania, actually.
Yep. Nicholas, you had a really interesting share in our little VIP lounge. What? And it was about currencies and yeah, I remember now that Russia is now winky winky nudge nudge. We don't know if we're going to be able to get this gas pipeline back on.
Yeah, I mean, look, I don't agree with Ken that, well, it's not Ken's point. With the interpretation, I believe that we are in war at the moment, and part of being at war is the desire for people to appease and to not stand up to outright aggression. And people are willing to sacrifice Ukraine because it's not part of the treaty, and it's not part of NATO, and it's not part of Europe. But at the end of the day, you've got a bad actor who has made it very clear that he did not want for the European powers to basically stand up to his tyranny. And the problem, if you don't stand up to tyranny, is that the tyrant becomes even braver and bolder. And so I think Finland and Sweden joining is the right thing to do. I think everybody's afraid of Putin, what he may well do. And I think part of what he's doing is exactly what I've said for the last 18 months, if not longer, that this is all part of the process of taking on the dollar hegemony and taking on the US global power. And whether that's right or wrong, whether this is the wrong way to do it, we could debate. But this is absolutely, we are at economic war. If they cut off the gas to Europe, that is an equivalent of declaring war. It's going to create a 5% drawdown in GDP. A 5% drawdown in GDP for the European economy is going to just plummet the euro. The euro is already under pressure. And again, I disagree. Not with, in normal circumstances, I would agree with Ken about earnings being diminished by currency weakness, but the euro has weakened by over 20% this year. And if you're getting a 20% drawdown in earnings per share, and your European business is going to be 20% more expensive, and there's going to be a giant recession, that means that there is going to be further pain in the S&P 500 and the earnings per share, which with inflation at these sorts of levels, it should be at 12 to 14 times forward earnings. Those earnings are going to have to be revised down. And so we are in for a wild time. And Russia knows this. And Russia has actively said that this is their aim. I
Right.
think I shared in the back channel a
Right.
video where it was made very clear. And then Sergei Lavrov made it absolutely clear that he is willing to use Nord Stream as a weapon, even though the Canadians went and returned the generator, which is classic sort of we'll do something nice for you, and then they turn around and well, you appease them, and then they continue to say that this is their aim. And then you've got the picture that I shared, or I think actually Vinny may have shared, with the Saudis and the Turks, and all holding hands and talking about this new BRICS currency, which we've talked about a lot for a long time. All of those predictions are happening. The world is moving into three camps. And I think that everybody should keep their eyes open, because I think the pain has not yet been, the real pain has not yet been felt. I think it's going to get worse before it gets better.
I want to simplify it for the folks who haven't been following the issue at all. That the big question, the big question that Europe has at the moment is Russia's temporarily shutting off the pipeline to Europe for quote unquote maintenance of sorts, and now they're insinuating that due to special circumstances, they don't know how long it'll need to stay off. It might need to stay off rather indefinitely due to technical difficulties. They can't, by the way, say in plain English, "We're shutting this off because we want to fuck you up." I mean, in one sense, they are say they're.
No, they did say that.
I
Lavrov
know.
came out and he actually said
I
that.
know. Putin
No,
is.
Lavrov.
I know, and the foreign minister Lavrov is as well. But they have to be. They also simultaneously have to be a little bit careful because they have to speak in a little bit of code in the way that they did in announcing that the pipeline might not come back on because they have to have plausible deniability of not being a bad actor because at some point Russia must be holding out some hope that the West will remove sanctions at some point in the future. And if they take bad actions like this, it's just going to exacerbate the length of time before
Oh,
the West forgets.
well, I think I don't
Yeah,
know. I really don't think
you
that
can't.
they care anymore. I think that their positioning is. Uh,
Go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah,
sorry, I think
because
that this.
try again.
Yeah, I was saying that this is a major gambit that they've taken on with the Chinese, and that what they're very smart. They understand that if you have dollar inflation, you get what is, potentially something called the Minsky moment. There is a problem, is that you export all this inflation all over the emerging markets, which means all of their debt and all of the things that they have to buy that's denominated in dollars keeps on going up and up because the dollar gets stronger and stronger. For anyone who's interested in listening or learning a bit more about this, there's something called the dollar milkshake theory, which a lot of people have been talking about, which is where the dollar, because its price is 60 to 80% of goods and services in markets, what it does is it creates endemic inflation in those local economies. And the worst scenario that you can have is that that drives all of those economies towards the edge. That's what we've seen in Sri Lanka. That's what we've seen, well, not necessarily for the same reasons in Sri Lanka, but that's what you're going to see across the emerging markets. We saw it in 1998. We've seen it in the past. And what that means is that they get faced with a default situation, or they get faced with the fact that the US can offer them something called a swap line. And when you get offered a swap line, it means that America will fund you. Now, America can fund all of their friends, but they will not fund their enemies. And so if you get to this situation, what you do is you offer them a swap line if they agree to keep their debt in force, essentially. They continue to pay their debts denominated in dollars. What you don't want to happen, if you're America, is that those people say, well, fuck it. We're not going to pay the debts. We're going to default on our dollar debt. We're going to be funded by alternative sources. And what the Russians are hoping is that the new system, the BRICS currencies, are going to say, we will fund you. And by the way, there's a further dislocation, which is where they say you should now take control of your domestic assets. So if you're Chilean, you take control of the copper mines, you throw out Vale, you throw out all of the international companies, and you say, we're renationalizing our assets, and we're going to back our assets in our domestic resources. So we're going to have a copper currency, we're going to have a gold currency, we're going to have et cetera, and that this would become the new currency of the BRICS nations, and they would fight back against America. That is the gambit which Putin is playing. This is his big bet. And so his desire to starve off Europe is a desire to create additional inflation
Right.
using the dollar in
Right.
order to spike the emerging markets so that they are driven into the hands, the welcoming arms of the autocratic, authoritarian East versus the Western liberal democratic West. But you've noticed in the narrative, they've been making it very clear that the West is not this peaceful nation, that they've murdered, tens of thousands in Iraq and in Yemen and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And they are taking on that narrative directly, that the Western liberal democratic way is not the peaceful way. The Chinese have killed, as far as you're aware, far less people. They haven't been involved in these escapades abroad, etc., etc. So the play is generational, and it's a final hurrah for Putin. So I don't see him worrying too much about not being an international pariah. He has made himself a pariah for all intents and purposes. And America has taken $600 billion worth of his reserves, so he's got every reason to be pissed off as well, because the sanctions have crippled his country. So the question is, can we topple, or can the West topple Putin? And what strength do they have? Now, it should also be noted that China is a massive importer of food and feed, and as such, if that accelerates, the US, Canada, Europe will have a way to retaliate against China. So Russia is the proxy fighter of this war, and China is sort of sitting behind and saying, we'll go along with this until people start taking pot shots at us. So we're in a major geopolitical. I consider that we are at war, even if we're not in a hot war. We are in a cyber war, we are in a currency war, and we are in a geopolitical economic war, for certain.
Hey,
Yes, so
Nicholas, just
Nicholas, couple of
can I just
additions here.
respond because you brought up my name?
Just couple of additions. Sorry, Ken.
No, no, no,
To
I
just
just
2 points. Two
go ahead.
points that the economic war is true, but Russian oil import by China and India has gone down. Number one. Number two, the currency they are trying to prop up are backed by gold or whatever. Those are deflationary currencies. They can never compete against dollar because the way dollar works, and the further financial detail, there's a huge paper about it, and I had a good discussion with the Wook and Tao. I can try to ping them in. There is a huge list of things why dollar will hold its power, and what they are trying to do will not work because of the deflationary nature of those currencies, which dollar is not. Sorry, Ken, go ahead.
No, that's
So,
fine.
so I just want to respond to Aaron on that.
Okay.
You are right. You are right that the U.S. is a credit-based system, and that it can issue, growing amounts of dollars that can fund growth, etc. However, the new model, that the new currency that the Russians and the Chinese and the BRICS are talking about, would effectively give them the ability to have a credit-based system whereby the fractional reserve, so the deposits, would be backed by hard assets, whether that's copper, gold, etc. It's not about being a gold-based currency that is deflationary. It is about being an asset-backed reserve, whereby the group of nations would effectively create an alternate credit system that would say to them, we will take your copper as reserves in the new system, rather than you paying your debts under the American system, the rapacious imperial, system. That's what they're selling out there right now. That's what they're offering.
And Nicholas, just two quick points. I was not arguing against most of your positions. I also agree that we're functionally in a war. I was just trying to explain the mentality of the 17 GOP congressmen who only view a war when it's a hot war, and so that they're objecting to
Understood.
Finland. Okay, yeah, okay, that's all. But the other thing on the currency translation, even though this is a historic currency translation, I think this is like we've never seen anything like this in 20 years. Even though I probably would argue that maybe the euro never should have been as valued against the dollar as it was for a long time. But leaving that aside, the reason when you're looking at a stock, whether it's Netflix or anything else, that you would ignore it, even if we were dealing with a kind of some permanently impaired foreign currencies, is what you're really buying a stock with maybe like hopefully a 20-year outlook on bringing back future cash flows. You're mostly concerned about are they gaining market share or losing market share? Are they gaining subscribers? Are they getting price increases in their local currency? All of
I
those
agree.
thing. Okay, so that's why I tend
I
to
agree, but
ignore them.
I do want to make note that if you were a company in Europe and you're going through a GDP decline of something like 5%, and you've got a currency devaluation of say
People are going to cut back, right?
25%, you're
People are
going to
going to
cut back. So it will affect
yeah,
your
right.
numbers,
That's
which is
true,
why I
right?
say with 9% inflation historically, the market should be trading at 12 to 14 times forward earnings, which we are currently trading at 16, 17 times forward earnings without the EPS revision to take account of the fact that European companies are going to cut back their use of American services if they continue to price them at a 25% premium to alternatives. That's all.
Right, and Netflix is trading way above those multiples. So yes,
Do you mind if I take the financial angle? And I think the time horizons are why we, the West, are screwed, because we in this room might listen to Nicholas and understand it and believe it. All of our system is built on cash flow discounting. The current finance system has floated everything for the last 50 years. And the people here in the West that are beneficiaries of it, we don't understand that all this cheap stuff we've gotten in zero inflation for 20 years in technology, um, that's basically been deflationary, right? But we haven't had to pay for it because we've globalized and outsourced so much. The West is screwed because you're always fighting the last war because you're always stuck in your agreements that were 20 years long to pay off. I have a buddy that used to be a financial advice client. We're great friends. He's about to put Tesla solar on his roof that he's building on his brand new house in Dallas. And even if he doesn't discount anything, he really wanted this thing. His desire was for it, but he's like, I can't get it to make sense. Even if I save $500 a month, I can't get it to make sense. And I'm like, you're already going to get taken over the rails if you do an adjustable rate mortgage, and things continue in this trend. But we're always making trades here in the West. We think it's a casino that'll last forever. But what Putin can do in the short term is break it. And all of these things are meant to break the system.
Okay, so my question is
That
the
is his
ruble
aim.
is
He is
propped
trying
up.
to. This is a. That's why I say it's a gambit. It is the czar's gambit. Can he break the system in the time it takes for the Fed to just basically destroy the demand in the US so that we need to get to what is known as neutral rates. If we can get to 3.5% and get inflation down to 3.5, 4%, which is what he's aiming for, destroy demand, right? Which is hard to do because we have a lot of services demand rather than goods demand now because the economy has changed. So normally when you destroy demand, you basically are stopping people from spending on a new car, on a new house, on et cetera, et cetera. But now we have a lot of service, a large part of the economy is service economy, and people don't, see that in the same way. But if we cannot succeed in getting to the neutral rate and getting into a recession and then out of a recession. And that's why you see the market reacting. The market is trading 6 months forward. And so when you see the market rallying and you saw Bitcoin rallying and you're seeing all these things rallying, is that every time we get a piece of bad news, the market says, well, it's good because it means we're going to go into recession sooner, which means he's going to start cutting rates sooner. The problem is we haven't got the rates to the neutral rate yet to get inflation to match the interest rate. So everyone needs to realize that if we're at 8.6% and the print in the UK was just 9.1% or whatever it was, right? We need to get that down to 3.5, 4, and we need to get rates up to 3.5, 4. So only when we get there can we start to cut rates back again. So we have to, get into recession, get into stopping demand in order to fight Putin. And this means that it also creates political unrest. And at the same time, when you raise rates, you get the dollar more likely to. Sorry, can you hear me?
Yes, we can. You try
Yeah,
again.
so that gets the emerging markets to a position whereby with dollar strength, they get.
Uh, Nicholas, you're in and out.
Sorry, it really is a chess match. It's a multi-dimensional chess match because raising rates is going to create ill will amongst the group that he's trying to attract to their new currency system. So, this is the game, and it's got a lot of very difficult pieces that you have to play, and you need to be a very good player. And Putin has everything to gain and almost nothing to lose.
Well, Nicholas, my question again is the currency he's trying to attract towards the ruble is artificially propped up. Look at the, I mean, look at the numbers. I don't know how anybody could trust ruble the way it's been just on crutches right now. It's not the real value, and
But it's
the
not the ruble. It won't be the ruble. In the case of Russia, they will contribute oil and gas as their reserves. So remember, the US dollar is based on the taxable returns that America can charge. So if we've got $25 trillion or $30 trillion of GDP, that makes tax revenue, which supports the ability to issue treasuries and the ability to issue and manage the global economy. Now, and we also have, remember, it's not only dollars in the US economy, it's euro dollars and petrodollars. So, the dollar prices 60 to 80% of all the goods and services in the world. So it means you have to have dollars to buy those assets. Now, if you create an alternative system, all of the countries that are going to contribute their resources, which means that Russia will provide, in the new currency, oil and gas. Chile will provide copper. Brazil will provide whatever their nationals are. And it's really about him saying, you don't have to pay those guys back. That's what they're going to say. You can default on the Americans. That is their whole game. Now, I don't think he'll win, but in the
I don't think
process,
either,
he,
because you
he
can
will
see how China
destroy.
and India is reducing their imports of oil. And again, the currency ruble is not reliable at all because
It's
it's
not the
not
ruble.
like
They're going to
dollar.
rely on the Chinese. The Chinese are sitting behind. The Chinese are buying are the backstop because they need all of these things. So, they are backstopped by China because China is using Russia as a proxy. China does not want to be beholden to the dollar. China needs to escape the dollar in order to become the global superpower that they will become, over the course of time. They will do that, but they also can't have a free floating yuan because they are manipulating their currency domestically, and they are not willing to disclose information into the system, which is exactly the reason why you see Gary Gensler saying that the 200 Chinese companies are not going to be able to comply with it. This is a full-on war. It's a narrative war. That's what we're always talking about, is don't look at what they say, look at what they do, and understand what they're doing is being played out through these narratives, which are feeding into markets, because markets are driven by information, and that information has to be accurate. That's why we have systems like the SEC, like the CFTC, is to assure the information input is correct. And that's what he said, just over the last few days. We have to ensure that the information is correct. Otherwise, we're trading on false information, whether we like it or not, whether you agree that the SEC is a good information protector or not. The whole system is under attack. That's why I say it's like, it may not win, but in the disruption, it is going to be very painful. So, people who are here and people who are listening, they need to have their eyes and ears. Look at the Thai baht. What's the situation over there, Tyler? How much is the Thai baht? It's at its all-time low against the dollar. That means it must be painful for people who need to bring dollar goods and services into Thailand, right? That must be happening for you now.
Yeah, it's painful, but I don't think he's going to win.
But Nicholas, China has a situation now where they need to reliquify their own economy, similar to what the United States went through in 2008. They've got a massive real estate crash. So, I mean, they've got their own problems right now. I mean, so
Yes,
Absolutely, they do.
absolutely,
Absolutely, they do.
absolutely.
But
China.
remember, they don't have to have the standards of information. Is that everything in China is a black box? The likelihood is that there'll be a collapse, and it could be overnight in China. That you wouldn't be able to know, but they can keep on, doing things because no one knows the truth except for the Politburo. So, ultimately, it's not a free floating market. And ultimately, they are dependent on America. But you've seen they've reduced their reserves. You've seen the Japanese have reduced. You've seen the Chinese have reduced. And now part of that is that they've got dollar liabilities and margin calls. So one way or another, all I'm saying is the amount of volatility we could see over the winter is going to be epic. And when I say epic, I lived through, the Russia crisis, the first Russia crisis, the Asia, crisis, the LTCM crisis. This is going to be as big, potentially, if they follow through. And what they're really hoping to do is through this type of, people like me and people like you who are watching this, what they're trying to do is to say, guys, we're going to suggest a ceasefire in Ukraine. We're going to suggest that we take Donbass and we're going to take that whole region, and you're going to cut off the Ukraine and tell them that they're going to have to, do what we want. Because if you don't, we are going to cut you off and we're going to threaten the whole system. So either you're going to give him what he wants, and the Ukrainians are going to, be appalled by this. But my bet is a wide swathe of the Europeans would rather say, screw the Ukrainians than freeze this winter. And, you cannot afford for Germany, which is the engine room. You can think of Germany as the New York and Los Angeles of Europe. If they go down the toilet, then the whole of Europe sinks, because Germany subsidizes all of the pigs, Portugal, Ireland, Greece, and Spain. Well, not so much Ireland, but Greece and Spain, Portugal, Greece, and Spain, which are running massive deficits, 150% plus of GDP. So that, and Putin knows this. Everybody who's, tapped into markets knows this to be the truth. So this is the big gambit. It's like, I'm going to show you, what's going to happen if you don't do what I want you to do. It is pure mafia politics, or power politics, however you want to think about it.
Yeah, he's trying to recreate the Weimar situation, panic in fear of that in Germany, and resentment within Germany, or sorry, within Europe. Kind of like Americans are balkanized and kind of hate each other, but they come together and they don't talk about it. He's trying to get what he's done to America in the last 6 years to happen even more, to tear apart democracies internally. So if we turn on each other, we'll cede him the grain of Ukraine,
But
and
that's exactly what the plan
resources.
is that there's a whole bunch of right-wing authoritarian leaders led by the Hungarian, whatever his name is, I can't remember his name. Anyone know his name? His name falls out of my head at the moment. Who are right-leaning. So everything that Putin is doing is to try and create discord and polarize the left and the right, whereas Europe is normally left-leaning. And now you've got a lot of this right-wing influence, and that will, we saw almost with Macron here, with Jean-Marie Le Pen's daughter, who almost got 30% plus of the vote. The whole thing is about dividing and conquering. And if we do go through a very difficult winter, I guarantee you the right wing of authoritarians will prosper in the forthcoming elections, and that will destabilize the whole peace that the Eurozone created from a zone that had 200 years of war.
But Europe also already have a plan to reduce their energy dependence on Russia. They have gone down from 35 to
But
25%.
Viktor
And
Orban is still
Viktor
huffing
Orban is the name of the guy that perhaps you were mentioning. So I'm hopeful that Europe will find alternative energy solutions and supplies, because they're already working on the plans, reducing their dependency on Russia. So it's not that bleak, Nicholas.
But you have to also know that
Viktor
that's dollar
Orban is
denominated. That is all dollar denominated oil and gas. And when you've got accelerating dollars, even if you've got more supply coming on stream, you're paying more in dollars and your currency is weaker, which in compounding, a recession, which is being prompted by higher interest rates in America versus low interest rates, even though they're going to raise rates in the next few days here in the Eurozone, that process is massively destabilizing. So it's not that, yes, we're going to be less dependent, but 25% supply shortage, relatively speaking, and 25% more expensive in dollars relative to your home currency is a major impact because it's such a large part of the economy, the power elements, and it is the force multiplier of every company needs power.
Okay.
Well, we have to stand up to the bully. We can't let the bullies win all the time. Look what he has done in the past, and considering his history, there is no escape. So we better stand up.
There
And
needs to be a Valkyrie moment. The Valkyrie moment is the only hope, I believe.
Vinay shared a link and with video of the tanks rolling into China to stop protesters at the banks. So the tanks are protecting the banks. No, sorry, it was Phil. And I got to share this one at the top of the clubhouse room so you can see this video. It looks like Tiananmen Square, for Jesus Christ's sake. It's a
Tiananmen ATM.
ATM Square.
Expect to see a lot more of that. This is going to be wild times. It's sad, but almost inevitable at this stage in the game.
I saw a statistic yesterday that somewhere just shy of 1 million Chinese are now refusing to pay their mortgages because why pay the bank that won't let you get your money out of their bank?
It's not mortgages. It's people who have put down money on buildings that should have been completed. So it's like when you're buying an apartment and you're paying the mortgage in the expectation of the building being completed, and because the buildings are not being completed because fundamentally the Chinese property sector has become unprofitable. So just like David was saying about his friend with the Tesla solar power things, the Evergrandes of the world, where you've got giant centralized developers, have essentially stopped and slowed down the ability for those Chinese to take possession. And they're saying, well, if you're not building them, then why the hell should we pay the mortgages? But that creates a death spiral. And
Right.
so the Chinese need to stop the death spiral. They need to have, it's like a bank run. And real estate has been like a bank for Chinese growth. That's why you see, I don't know if you've ever been to China. Well, you've been to China a lot. I've been to China. But if you haven't been there, you've got to see these buildings. They're like insane, high rises everywhere. They're all empty. And all they were doing was really like speculating on crypto, saying, oh, we're going to be this and we're going to be that. And those buildings will fill up and we'll make money and this, that, and the other. But really all they've been doing is speculating. So they've got a giant speculation bust that is happening, and the Chinese need to arrest that run on the real estate banks, and that is a major issue.
Yeah, but Nicholas, hasn't the vacancy in real estate, both commercial and residential, hasn't it been there for a decade and a half?
Yes, but when you have low interest rates environment, where there is little alternative, you get this rollover, which is why I always talk about the perniciousness of zero interest rate policies, which started in 1992 with Soros breaking the Bank of England, and then in 1999 with Alan Greenspan saving the dot-com bust. Every time we take rates to zero, markets trade on a relative basis. They don't trade on an absolute basis. It's like, well, I'll put my money into Chinese real estate if I can get 7% because I'm getting nothing and the money, and I've got real estate behind it, right? As soon as you get offered 3.5% on treasuries, the 7% in dodgy Chinese, hyper cities that are unoccupied doesn't look that good. And so everything is about everything's about relativity, especially in financial markets. And as you see these ripple effects, it destabilizes all of the pricing, which is why I believe that the dollar will, or if the policymakers do the right thing, establish its preeminence through this process, because people do trust that the American system does effectively tax, and also it can enforce with its monopoly on violence through its massive, political and economic and military force. It has, real power. So does the Chinese, but it's going to be painful. You don't want it to go hot. If this is where Taiwan becomes a giant concern for people. Is that is a place where it could go hot. It could go hot if That's why you're talking about Finland and Sweden. That those are provocations in inverted commas that Kissinger and that lot would say. You provoked Russia with the Ukrainian NATO talk. You should never have rattled those sabers, and this is the outcome of it. Now, I don't agree with that, and I believe, like Aram, we should stand up to tyrants. But the problem is that regular people, when they're starving and when they're losing all their money, they really don't give two shits about the average Ukrainian person. And they're like, I never heard of Ukraine before. They'll find lots of reasons why, they were, they shouldn't care about them, and they're going to care about themselves. And that, again, goes to the conscious agent theorem, which is there's a fitness function. And, food is a major fitness function. If people are hungry and they're cold, they will say, screw you to all of your political whims.
Or when they are hungry and cold, they find alternative solutions. Like if you join Ben's room, you will find out there are ways to self-sustain if you have intentions. And I
Only if
have
you have money.
great faith in
It's
people
not
and how
just money,
resourceful
Nicholas.
they can be when they are driven by a positive intention. For this, reason right now, standing up to this bully who, no matter people, if they try to blame us for provocation is not the case. In the past, look at the history of how many millions of people are killed by this tyrant, autocratic, evil person. And if we are not standing up to him now and just thinking about, oh, let go and just obey, what fate are we choosing for ourselves? We don't want to die in and face extinction just because we want to appease a bully to this extent. So I have great faith in people. I have great faith in alternative solutions. And I have great faith that we can endure pain briefly to, choose an outcome which is good for the entire globe and millions of people around the world.
I wish you were correct, but in the observation of people and history, fitness, which is what, when push comes to shove, what you're going to do, and solutions that take a long time and a lot of money and are not as effective. We have to acknowledge that the Germans have already fired up their coal plants. They're going to do what they need to do, regardless of sustainability, regardless of all these wonderful options for heat source pumps and all this other stuff. It's not going to be the decision they make. They will make the most economically apposite decision. My view is they should bring on nuclear power. But the problem with nuclear power is that it gives you targets for people who want to create nuclear wastelands. So if you're in a hot
So,
war, that's a problem.
Nicholas, let me jump in here. So, nuclear is going to take 10. Nuclear's cool, love nuclear, but it takes 10 years to get going. So, there's a bit slow. Totally, they're absolutely going to do what they need to do and fire up the coal power plants. And I haven't really got a problem with that. I'm not a massive, you've got to do what you've got to do. But every joule of heat energy they're needing to put into their houses is leaking out of the walls. And every bit of heat they're needing to use in the winter is waste. All of it is waste. Every
I
person
agree.
produces 400 watts of heat, and all of
I
it is
agree.
waste. So if your places are well insulated enough, which can be
But
very cheap,
Ben, when
which
you're
can be very
suffering
cheap with
from
the right
major
knowledge.
economic problems, that costs money, and people are not going to retrofit, all of this stuff when they don't have money to feed themselves because the
Cardboard,
economy is being
cardboard,
destroyed.
There are alternatives,
cardboard,
Nicholas.
aluminum foil, polystyrene, duvets, mattresses. It's more about the knowledge than it is about. If you want to do it beautifully, then you need money. So what I do here is we prototype stuff. We put out aluminum foil over south-facing windows. It looks like shit in a beautiful listed building, of course, but we do it. We prove it works, and then we go and because then the privilege comes in. We then go and purchase a nice blind, with a proper silver backing. But the other solution would work. It's just like snobbiness that makes me want to change it for a decent blind. The same with insulation.
I'm with you. I just don't see that happening across, the 500 million people in Europe over the course of this winter. That's what I'm saying. Is
It
I'm not against
could.
any.
Well, a
I'm
lot of my
pro. I'm
German
pro all this
friends
stuff.
are willing to do anything needed to do to go through this winter just to support Ukraine.
But
Many
that's not
are.
50 million
So Nicholas,
employees.
Recent
presumably
history
being
says the
cold.
Germans turn very quickly when they're faced with, fitness versus truth. I can tell you this from my own personal experience in our own family. People turned very quickly in the 1930s, and it didn't end well. So I'm not overly hopeful Despite
They
the fact that
absolutely.
I love the Germans, modern Germans, when push comes to
1930s, they
shove,
did not have access to
this
this
is
knowledge and information, which is
Yes,
now
because they
available, and we can learn pretty quickly based on the knowledge and information that we have at hand, how to do
that
things,
that
how to
that that's
I
the
The
hope you're right.
asymmetry.
XS2
That's
arguments are
that's
terrible. We live in America. Access to healthcare. Look at how that's working out. Access to
so.
doesn't mean shit when people are lazy and would rather sacrifice someone else. That's human nature. Fitness
That's
versus
I'm
truth.
fitness versus truth. That is
I'm
fitness
kind
versus
I'm
truth. The
kind of
fittest
agreeing with all.
decision is to say, screw you. We're going to settle with the Russians. We're going to do a deal with them. We're going to give up the Donbass and Kharkov and all the other stuff. And, sorry, Mr. Zelensky, you're just going to have to eat shit. I guarantee you that Europeans will take that option sooner than they decide to put silver foil on their windows in
Nicholas,
the winter.
I pretty much completely agree with you, but I would have thought that the fitness function for being cold is pretty high and up there with food. Food is not so easy for the average person to become self-sufficient in. That is a much more difficult problem. But I'm not addressing food, but
But
heat
they've got to go to work.
and water and electricity is a little bit easier. Yes, so you either have to have money or you have to have time, and if you have absolutely none of either, then you're going to have a lot of
Which
motivation.
80% of people have no time and no money because they're spending it all
Yes. So
trying to
what is
keep
your
their head above
proposed?
water.
So what is your proposed solution? So that we spend a lot of time and energy talking about problems, but my response here is to spend every day an hour and a half of my time every day after tech news at 5 p.m. going using physics to explain to people how they can actually make a difference today. So I've cut my electricity bill in
I'm
three.
with
So
you. I'm with you. The
inflate away
solutions to
electricity
the
prices.
problems are democracy. Ultimately,
Yeah, but no,
it's
but
a
immediate
slow, it's a
solutions that you. But we don't
immediate
have
solutions.
time. I'm talking
Yeah,
about
right.
Germany are
I
going to freeze
agree. Right.
this
Nicholas,
year.
The
could you
Germans are
let Ben
going to sell
finish,
out.
please?
They're going to,
Yes,
Aaron,
they.
I'm
So
having a
so what does
conversation.
So what does somebody in Germany do this year before they get very cold this December? If they don't understand the basics of thermodynamics, they are going to get very cold.
They're going
And
to
there's a
go
lot
out
of
on the street and litigate for their politicians to do a deal and sell out the Ukrainians. That's
Yes,
what they will do.
Nicholas,
You
Ben, excuse
cannot
me.
be that sure, Nicholas. Sorry,
so
but that's not true.
There's a couple of hundred people, Ben, in your room, and there's hundreds of millions of Europeans. They're not listening to your room. That's why Nicholas
of
is
course,
right. When you deal with
not,
with
buddy.
what?
Yeah, of course. But the rooms I'm doing at the moment are kind of just for fun. But if I scale this up, like I did with teaching people to develop games, we'll have millions of
Ben,
people like we currently
I
do.
love what you're saying, but I'm just being realistic in light
I'm being
of
realistic
this.
too.
Is
Nicholas,
billions of
what?
people are being affected
Yes,
by
and they're
a
going to be
dictator.
affected,
What
and it's
I
going to be
think is the
awful.
solution is
Yes,
someone needs to kill Putin. That's what I mean by the
I
Valkyrie. Someone needs to take this guy out and shoot him in the head, and we should be offering $1 billion to the 100 people that are guarding
absolutely,
him and say, get rid of this moron and let's end this
absolutely,
shit. Right, that's the
And you
answer.
really
absolutely.
The only
think
question
everything's
is,
going
when's
to
that going to
end
happen?
after you do that? Do you really
But
think
No,
exactly what comes
no,
next?
replacing one
What
right.
comes
person
next?
fixes everything?
Nicholas, let me just
I
It
think
explain
that
the
there is
sells the
one
philosophy.
concept.
lunatic.
Listen, Nicholas, let me explain the philosophy. We have no control problems, such as all this shit's happening. You're trying to transform it sensibly and make some significant process by transforming a no control problem into an influence problem, which is we might be able to do something about this if we influence the right people. And that is for a lot of people, and that's a massive step forward from a no control problem. I like to just take one more step, this is just my personal personality, and transform an influence problem into a direct and immediate control problem. What can
I
I and
agree
people
with
around
you.
me
I agree
directly and
with you.
immediately do about this?
Ben, I
Sometimes the
agree
answer is
with you, but
nothing,
we're
and I'm going
talking
to die,
about
by the way.
politics, right? But we're talking about politics. So we're not talking about what we'd like to happen. We're talking about people vote, and that's why I'm afraid that if we go through this, it will lead to a vote, and in that vote, people will vote for people that would have done the deal. So everyone who stands up and says we're not going to go and we're not going to buckle down, and I want to support the Ukrainians as well, and I would vote for that, right? But I would vote for that because I'm less afraid of that. But those people who are living in the trauma loop are going to vote for the person that is going to advocate for them because they care for the fact that a Viktor Orban will say, let's do a deal with Putin. A Trump, who said directly, if this was me, I would be, working it out with Putin, not doing what Biden's done, or, whether it's true or not, it doesn't really matter. The narrative that he's using is there was peace with Putin with Trump. That will play out across Europe. That potentially will cause more problems down the track. And that's what I'm saying. I'm just witnessing this feature of life, which is called, this is evolution, which is called fitness versus truth. Truth is the stories you tell yourself. Fitness is what you're going to do when it's you starving, and it's when you are freezing, and when you don't know anyone in the Ukraine, and you say, really? If this guy wants the Ukraine, why not give it to him? Why not let him take
So,
the southern region or the eastern region? That's what they'll do. I'm just
I,
being realistic.
you're right, Nick. Ben, make your if you want a minute to make a final point.
So, I mean,
I,
a final point would be so, Ken, you're saying like there's 200 people in these rooms. Sure, that's nothing. I've not even started to scale this, very casual. 1,000 people pass through every room, and some of those people are talking to people who talk to people. It doesn't take long for the message to spread. If I want to scale it, I'll do it properly. I'll do podcasts, YouTube, Udemy courses. I'll do what I've done before and get millions of people before this. So I'm on the verge of doing that. I'm just getting the right people involved. I may or may not. I'm kind of retired. I don't know, but it's sounding like a really important course. So maybe I need to get my ass out of gear. I
right.
think you can do a lot with knowledge. We didn't used to have all of mankind's historical knowledge in the palm of your hand. So when these situations have happened in the past, people couldn't necessarily make the change they need to make. We can both coordinate better than we could, and we can get information much faster than we could. And I hope that at least some people, and it will only be some people, will use that asymmetric knowledge advantage to help themselves. And if they help themselves, people around them will say, oh, how are you doing that? And it'll spread. So that's
Right.
all I can hope, direct control.
So I love this conversation, by the way, because it might have future relevance in the form that what Europe might go through in the winter during a real energy crunch might be a beautiful rehearsal for future climate related stress, right? So people are going to get very cold in the winter with lack of energy. Okay, that is a really nice way to inconvenience people into uh, either waking up and it really comes. This is the really interesting question that's being posed by this sort of debate: is will people take accountability? And I love that Ben's trying to encourage people to do so, or will they kind of delegate that to the mom and dad and ask them to fix it, or else we're voting you out. And of course, he's right. A whole lot of the question is it's not a binary question. It's a spectrum question because
So,
some percentage of people are going to go into survival mode and put tinfoil in the windows and do everything that they can or whatever. And some percentage of people are helpless and are going to try and defer the whole responsibility onto politicians and tell
so
them
I think,
to.
so Tyler, I think
Nicholas, you're exactly. Both of you are right.
no, I was
So,
going to say something to your point. So
yeah,
I would say I was hopeful that during COVID, that experience, that
right.
fitness versus truth experience would unite us. I thought
Right.
if we've got a virus that everybody can get, doesn't matter if you're black, you're white, you're Chinese, you're all going to be suffering the same way. And look what happened. Misinformation and disinformation polarized us with masks about something as stupid as a flimsy mask we couldn't put on without fighting and othering each other. So my personal view is I am less optimistic about the likelihood of us
So
resolving this with this
Yeah,
experience
but
of
you
let,
have
let,
to
let,
cold
let
and
me give you
hungry.
all the
let
I
me
propose
propaganda.
that
I
COVID
understand your
showed
reason.
us we
I totally,
cannot unite in these
Nicholas,
scenarios. We
I'm with you.
divide.
Nicholas, I'm living on a fucking remote island. That's how much I agree with you. That the world is going to go to shit because the humans won't be able to figure it out. But let's applaud
And at some
Ben.
point, let's talk about solutions, for
Let's
fuck's
let's
sake.
Yeah,
applaud Ben
let's
for
I
talk
taking.
about
agree. I
political
applaud it. I
positiveness.
applaud it.
I
I
know
just
you
wanted
do.
to
I know you.
be
I'm not saying you're
a
not.
realist.
I'm not saying.
We're all on the same page here.
My comment isn't to you, Nicholas. My comment is I want to. I did applaud Ben 5 days ago and say how fantastic I think it is that he's doing these rooms, and it's a leadership by example scenario that I hope has a butterfly effect because the more people that take self responsibility, and the sooner we can drive a cultural shifting narrative that is the right thing for adults to do, the better. Because and in a weird way, this frozen winter hopefully will shift cultural consciousness in that direction, because I want to use the opportunity to, and I don't pick the tweet that I have saved as the first tweet for today. We haven't even gone through the tech stories yet, by the way. But the first tweet that I have for today, let's just jump to it because it's so perfectly related, is this Saudamini found. And actually, I just pinned Saudamini's link. But what I really want to pin is the hopefully the image will pop up here in Clubhouse so that you can. It's all about an image that NASA whipped up here. And here it comes. Hold on 2 seconds. Hopefully it'll share the image at the top. It's a picture of the world going through this heat wave.
Yes.
Did it come? Is it there? PTR?
Yes,
Yeah, we got it, Tyler.
Yes, yes.
Yeah, we got
Okay,
it.
great.
Yeah.
Right. So NASA shows horrific heat wave on Earth as humans suffer unbearable conditions. And now here's why this is so interesting to me and why it connects today with tomorrow in a very perfect way. That map that NASA just released, and by the way, let me read this article. NASA shared a horrifically red world map highlighting the heat wave conditions in Africa, Europe, Asia, where temperatures have hit never seen before highs. NASA warns the world of extreme weather caused by greenhouse gases after the Earth map shows heat wave-like conditions, blah, 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 the Earth is suffering. You get the idea. Now, why is this relevant? Because that map, where it shows the dark red, the darkest of red areas, in fact, they're nearly black, represent a basically uninhabitable air. The heat level is so high that if it were persistent, you wouldn't live there. You couldn't live there. Temporarily you could live there. Now, here's the point. I have one of my favorite topics is the water stress. The places of the planet that are going to run out of water the soonest, right? There will not be enough water in certain areas of the planet, and people will have to migrate, and you'll have climate refugeeism, and that's coming, and you've heard me do that rant 100 times. Now, you've heard me say that the water stress map of where the water will be disappearing from, and you can see that by simply Googling the words water stress map. But I know that map. I have that map memorized because I chose where I live today based on that map. And this map that NASA just released today of where these hot temperatures are perfectly correlated with where the water disappears from. So you've heard me say everywhere from Western Africa all the way to Eastern China is going to become uninhabitable. And that's where you're going to have potentially 1 billion refugees. It's about 500 million is kind of the safe estimate. 500 million refugees, largely Muslim, which adds additional fuel to the fire, because if you look at this map that NASA just released, you'll notice that the Muslim world largely becomes uninhabitable. And the burning question is, no pun intended, where the hell are they going to go? Because Europe sure as shit isn't going to take them. We know that because just before the Russian invasion of Ukraine, we had the Belarusian/Russian support of the Afghanistan refugees trying to get into Poland, and Poland shut the border down to 3,000 Afghani refugees just
And don't
days.
forget the Syrian situation, which was prompted by Putin.
Don't get me started.
The whole
Don't get me started.
situation.
Yeah, and then if you look at the map, you'll also notice Pakistan becomes relatively uninhabitable and is already running out of water, as every Pakistani person knows. And the Pakistanis know better than anybody. India isn't going to allow a wave of Muslims coming in. Are you kidding me? Do you understand what's going on in India right now with Muslims? You think they're going to let a number of Muslims come into India? That is not in the plans. So they're not going into Europe. They're not going into China. You think Muslims are going to jump over the Himalayas to go into Uyghur land? Yeah, right. So they're not going into China or Europe or India. Ergo, where the hell are they going to go? So that map, to me, is a really interesting crystal ball to get your mind, let that image sink in, and get ready, because when the heat gets this hot, at any length of time, the water disappears, the crops disappear, the people must migrate. It's rather inevitable. This is very simple ABC dot connection, something I'm incredibly fond of doing. And notice, by the way, that Thailand is not hot at all. But by the way, it's lovely here today, just letting you know. So anyway, and we had rain today, by the way. So that's why I find this argument of what do humans do when shit gets real and uncomfortable, when they've been pampered and convenienced to death their entire life.
I love this discussion.
So,
And
Tyler,
one thing we do know
sorry.
is humans end up gnawing on each other.
So the more when shit goes wrong, it may only go wrong for a few days is one of the first thing. And if the more people are prepared just for a few days, the
Amen.
less idiots are going to be calling 911 saying I've run out of water for 3 days. Just have some freaking water bottles. Let me explain the mentality that I'm going for here. It is that if you are worried about X, let's say that my heating is going to stop because the gas coming into the building is going to go off, then stare that fucker down. Turn your gas off. Turn it off just for 3 minutes and find out that you don't die. Firstly, step one, check, prepare, anticipate every possible eventuality, including asking the plumber who knows about your boiler whether that's going to block the jets or whatever, right? So prepare the best you can, number one. Then turn your gas off for 3 minutes. Turn it back on again. Now, either it's all going to be swimmingly fine, or there's going to be a few things that happen that you did not anticipate. An alarm's going to go off here, something's going to go there. You realize you don't know where to turn your gas off, and you'll be freaking glad you do when you first have a gas fire, and so forth. Then do the same thing for 3 hours. Both of these, Nicholas, you can do after work. You spend plenty of time at these time scales, and you'll still find nothing happens except for maybe your radiators start getting cool or your hot water doesn't work. Then try turning it off for 3 days. Do more preparation. Anticipate what's going to go on. Do it. Other shit will happen you were not anticipating. Fix it while the going's good. Get the plumber to fix the boiler if you screwed it and you didn't anticipate things properly. And then go. And then go for 3 weeks. Now, if you can get that up to 3 months, that's the winter done. If you start now, then the fears and uncertainties will go away. You've got time between now and the winter, just about if you get on with it, to do a 3 month gas off bit drill and see whether you have an immersion heater and you can use it. See whether you can keep a room warm with an electric fire or whether you can not just keep it warm with your body heat or whatever. Just face it, test it, do it. If you've done these drills, no one can tell you can't get through the winter without your gas because you can tell them, fuck it, I've done it. Or I've, close enough done it.
So you
And
know
you can
what?
apply the same mentality to all the factors: food, energy, water, security, medicine, air, clean air, recycling, transport, the whole lot.
Right. So the degree to which people will protest and try and solve by delegation to politicians to accept Putin's deal, and I'm with Nicholas. I'm going to wager that a good percentage of people are going to do that. The question is what percent, and the answer to that question is it depends on the degree to which people prepare, because preparedness is the cure to this particular disease, which again I applaud Ben for taking a very hands-on role with. So how to scale, to use a startup term, the preparedness mind state to reduce the amount of fear and what's the words I'm looking for?
Panic, uncertainty,
Yeah, all,
anxiety.
and then try to force that onto the politicians to accept a deal with with Putin.
Can I add another layer to that?
Please do.
As if it's not bad enough. About 10 years ago, I was made aware of some State Department modeling that predicted that climate change, in causing a shift in the range of various vectors of disease like mosquitoes, was going to be the biggest threat to national security in the U.S. because of the migration towards the poles of many different disease communicable diseases. Now, if you think about the compounding of people who are desperate, highly concentrated, migratory, and bringing with them um, human vectors of these diseases, we and many people have said this before. Um, the COVID pandemic could just be a mild taste of what lies ahead in terms of the compounded risks associated with climate change induced climate refugees, vector species expansion, and so forth. So the resistance to housing and supporting a 500 million or more climate refugees is going to be amplified by the communicable communicable disease and public health threat of those migrations. So it really there are many compounding factors in what Tyler's been talking about for the last few years.
And I think it's great that John's spot on and Tyler. Another thing that I would love to hear more about too is you got places like Siberia that have been covered in ice forever that are now, you got the marshes and everything that come up. What about the diseases and all the things that have been held under those things for centuries? So you got this migration that John just spoke about. You got this water issue, and we got these other things that have been laying dormant for ages.
Well, and speaking of compounding, um, the methane in the tundra that escapes with melting of the tundra is a much more potent greenhouse gas than is carbon dioxide. And so, again, the compounding factors for climate change alone, the physics of it, have not been, and I've been saying this for years, have not been built into the models. The models are all linear, multiple variable linear models without compounding the cross linear impacts of those events. So the more methane released from melting tundra, the more the greenhouse warming accelerates, the more people turn on their air conditioners, the more sea level rises, the more cement is poured, which contributes to 7-8% of total CO2 production in the world to stave off rising water levels. It's the compounding of all these issues has been woefully underestimated. And these projections about, oh, we'll go up 1.5 degrees Celsius in 50 years, I believe for a long time, are inadequate to address those compound factors. And so hopefully we will have some of the technologies that Chris Fornoff is so fluent with come to the rescue sooner rather than later, because we're not going to have any doubts or doubters about just how impactful climate change is by the end of the summer. I mean, for any enlightened person, it was obvious years ago, but for the majority of the world, there's been a lot of confusion. I don't think that confusion is going to last much longer.
And
John,
to
I
add
think
to
you might
that,
be.
if I may, Ben, David, this is I follow, as you most of you know, I do geopolitics as my sort of side passion, but this is where my actual work is. And just to John's point, most of us know, I think, climate change is a threat multiplier. It's one of those things that you don't see it. You see it mainly occurring through the intensification or magnitude or frequency of other events. So, the increase in frequency of hurricanes, or if a flood happens, it's more intensified. You don't see climate change specifically itself directly affecting things, apart from if you're talking about heat. And heat is something that has taken a little bit longer to see the multitude of effects happen. But this is a threat multiplier, and it does compound existing issues. To what has just been said, as more of the ice sheets in the Arctic melts, you get the exposure of the tundra and hundreds of year old pathogens appearing that we have absolutely no idea the potential impact that they're going to have. Then you have the compounding effect on readily unstable regions. An interesting point of note, just for example, is the relationship of climate to conflict, which is what my main nexus of focus is. The Second World War was actually a few of the years with some of the most industrially bad for the planet. And if you see climate change exacerbate fragile situations in other parts of the world, say the Middle East or Ukraine, you can see the intensification of, well, local microclimate deterioration. And if you look at the comments, people are saying that climate change is not an issue for them because of the immediacy. But the problem is, climate change is something so difficult to relate to that people forget about how everything is intertwined to it, including conventional war. And then the last thing I would just say is that there is generally a lack of appreciation of climate security. At COP26, for example, when I was covering it, there was no attention paid at all to climate change as a security issue. The UN Security Council have not made any effort to like pass resolutions to actually treat this as a security threat, not just one that we need to do from, say, a developmental or sociological or social economic one. Because if you don't treat it as a security threat, then you don't come at it with the same urgency. And certain countries are blocking this. Certain countries have that vested interest. And it just makes the entire matter worse. And whilst we mainly look at climate change from a global south perspective, if you begin to see the deteriorating effects of climate change on the global north, the countries with the capacity, the know-how, the I don't know, facilities to at least start a response. Well, if they go down underneath, not like terribly, but if they're affected because of the extreme heat, then you really are going to be on a back foot as well. So that's something we have to think about, as well as all the other things mentioned before. Anyway, that's all I want.
So I agree with
Piotr, isn't
John
it
in
true that
terms
the?
of just
Go ahead.
one
Sure.
announcement.
Yeah.
If anyone wants to learn more about climate change, follow Dan Miller and his rooms where he explains in detail with evidence why, how, and it's very informational. And deniers, if climate change deniers would go and listen to those rooms and the discussion over there, enough evidence is presented. Dan Miller.
Go ahead, Shahin.
Piotr, a question. Didn't the U.S. military do all these analyses and future predictions like a decade ago? I'd like to think that some parts of various governments have been on this specifically for the security issue, and in agreement with what Tyler has been saying forever, it is really hard to see a future where water stress, climate motivated migration, all that others does not lead to conflict, war, and other bad undesirable
Well,
things.
it's
So
happening already. So I worked on Crisis Group, right? And they have an interesting feature called the Crisis Watch Tracker, which is essentially a policy tool to measure the deterioration of crises, conflict in different parts of the world. But what was underdeveloped was the aspect to transnational issues like climate change. So much of my work whilst I was there was incorporating climate change. So what we did was basically go back to when I think Crisis Tracker has been around for about 20 years now. So what we did was try and integrate as many of the previous studies all the way back to 2003, 2000 to draw parallels and identify common trigger points in previous conflicts, be them in the global south, Latin America, wherever it was, and understand what it is that makes conflict, climate instability, all these sorts of things connected. And generally there's been a poor private sector approach to this. I hardly see Lockheed or any private sector entity doing this, because at the end of the day, non-profits, whilst they have the moralistic push, they don't have necessarily the funding. So there needs to be a greater public partnership, cooperation on this, for one thing. The other thing I'll just say, for example, I'll use one tiny case study. So in the past 4 years, Nigeria has been grappling with a herder farmer crisis, which is essentially because of the intensification of drought, as the desertification of the Sahara Desert spreads outward, which is why that map above is very pertinent, because it shows you that not only is it deepening, but it's also spreading further out. It's beginning to put pressure on Nigeria's northern arable land, which is very fertile. It's very necessary for Nigeria is a huge exporter of certain goods, right? And it's also meant to be the mega economy of Africa in the future. And so you've got farmers wanting to grow their crops. You've got herders wanting to sustain their livestock, fighting over nourishable bits of land, arable land, which are then basically, what do? They resort to terrorism, because it gives them a sense of purpose, it gives them a sense of stability, but it also allows them to control those more valuable bits of land. And so that's why part of the reason you've seen Boko Haram become such a prevalent force in that part of the world, region, because people are just actively supporting them. The same you could say in Somalia with Al Shabaab. They're supporting the disgruntled fishermen, who are losing out to income from all sorts of places because of the ocean acidification and deterioration of fish stocks. So this is going to have Well, the security crisis is already there from the climate change perspective, but it's the unwillingness of the North to do more about it, thinking that it won't affect them, when really it will because of climate migration and everything else. But anyway,
We generally just do too much top-down thinking as a species. It's very arrogant to think that we can design things
absolutely.
top-down when everything in nature is built bottom-up. Unless you're unless you're the other 50% of Americans who are what's the word wrong? No, delusion. No, creationists. Sorry. Then you think it's top-down, but it's probably bottom-up. So why do we think we can make top-down decisions and take into account all the details? How about bubbling everything up bottom-up? Experimentation, repeating, scaling, why not do things that way and solve the problems that way? People don't get stressed if they can solve their own issues. I
But
just,
just on that
I think,
point,
I think we're very arrogant being top down. Not you, Piotr. This is not in response to your awesome impact. I think you're an awesome dude, as you know, and do come for that cup of tea, old chap, as we say in England. But the idea that we have enough intelligence for a few individuals to make a decision that is so multivariant, to John's point, is so non-linear, that is going to affect the lives of billions of people. I just don't think we're smart enough to make those decisions, taking into account all the factors. There is another way, which is called bottom up. Do stuff, repeat it, scale it,
well,
join ideas together, and keep going.
well, this is
Well,
what the World Bank
you
and
have to
other.
do both. You have to do both. You'd like your institutions to be prepared, but you also want the citizenry to be prepared. And
I,
Well,
I, I
this is what
totally
I'm doing
agree,
at the
Shaheen.
moment, Ben.
I
If I
agree.
may, just in the World Bank, right? So my work is I've just started a new project with them now, and what we're doing is I'm going to be producing. Basically, I can't give too much details, but I'm going to be producing a brief, basically, that talks about trying to centralize all these metrics together, and understanding what existing World Bank tools there are, but not specifically just recognizing them, because there's so many different teams, and the lack of centralization or coordination between the different task team leaders, different departments. Like climate change is one of the prevailing themes of the World Bank now, along with poverty eradication. But this is now basically the goal of the World Bank, is to try and streamline and what's the word, synthesize all these metrics into one easily accessible way area, or whatever you want to call it, right? And then provide them to the relevant projects, country leaders, whatever it is, in the respective places, because there are similarities between these issues that are being faced, but the respective response mechanisms that are needed are best known by the people who live there. And what the world has done for too long, particularly in the multilateral sector like the UN, has not listened to the local knowledge. They don't have the capacity, the funding, the facilities to implement these changes. It's the same with the UN peacekeeping, right? But they do know the local know-how, and so you've got to combine top-down funding and access to resources, but with grassroots-led, bottom-up, as we say, local-led and local-owned. There's nothing more arrogant than the West to come in and say, "Hey guys, all right, this is what you should do." How long have you lived there? Do you know the region? Do you know the history of the topography and vegetation? No. Oh, okay. Then how on earth do you have any idea what's the best way to facilitate solutions? So yeah, that's what we're working on at the moment. And
Yeah, and
Ding, ding,
if I
Um,
could,
spot
if I
on,
could just
spot
connect
on.
two other, if I just connect two other, um, uh,
John?
I think
Eric
we lost you.
Weinstein.
Oh,
Yeah,
Yeah, I'm
John,
back.
try again.
Yeah,
try again, John.
Eric Weinstein in this forum on Clubhouse has really articulated the epistemic disruption of those who build their belief systems based upon facts and those who construct their facts versus those who construct their facts based on belief systems. That's a very crude description of the epistemic disruption. If you imagine, as Tyler pointed out, the areas that are becoming uninhabitable because of heat first predominantly affect one large global religion, and you look at how religions build their epistemology, how they establish what truth is, based upon a belief system first, and then the facts aligned with it in many cases, not all, but in many cases. The other force amplifier or phenomenology will be that religious based conflict will likely supersede nation state based conflict because of the numbers of people who subscribe to particular religions will be displaced as climate refugees, and how in the in the panic and the anxiety and the existential threat that climate refugees will be facing, they will turn more likely than not to the uh, belief based systems of religion rather than the fact based systems of science. And religious based conflicts are likely to become more dominant than nation state based conflicts, and nation states will be trying to insulate themselves against religion based conflicts in ways that are going to challenge the moral compass of every one of us in terms of how you resolve those kinds of issues at scale.
We're
Okay.
seeing that
Well,
happen already. Just to your point.
So one other brief thought there. So Sudamine, I think it was no, who said? Anyway, whoever said, I totally agree with them. Shahin, that you need top down and bottom up. But I always campaign for bottom up because I think a bit too much top down gets done. When there's no undo button, there's no undo button with some of these policies and things that we said. If you're sometimes trying to solve a difficult problem in like computer science or whatever, sure, try anything. You can go back, just roll it back if it didn't work. If you have unanticipated consequences, but when you haven't, it's pretty dangerous to do top down sweeping changes where you can't model the outcomes when you can't undo either. So that's the thought.
okay.
And if I can, just very quickly to add into what Nicholas said, we really have to look into what these multilateral institutions and development partners have done for the last 50 years. They have been in developing countries, especially in Africa, for changing just the methodology from one to the other and the other, and have never done anything sustainable that seems to be changing the dynamics of how things are being done. Yes, there have been Millennium Development Goals to Sustainable Development Goals, and now from aid to investment or, sustainable green economy, you name it. It's just sometimes changing the name of it, but the fundamental way of doing business on the continent is really not that much different. Even now, even when you look at the impact investing and others that development finance institutions do, it's still the same, really. They come up with a different screening criteria and other things. So, yes, they do have some way to involve local indigenous kind of, communities, but they still are the one driving it because they are controlling the financing as well. So they structurally are not made to make that type of fundamental change. And this is why China, when it came in and said, investment and not aid, even though, it hasn't been really done well, and not to forget about some of the evil that has done, including the debt crisis. That just fundamentally doesn't change. It's just a race rehearsal. So I just want to add that. Thank you.
Mesty, real quickly before we're going to go into tech news now. What theoretically would be the response from the northeastern countries of Africa, like Egypt, Sudan, for example, and Ethiopia, which you know well? Um, yeah, because you could have a whole bunch of them come from Saudi Arabia across. It gets very short down there at the bottom of the Red Sea, right there near Ethiopia, right? So if there were to be millions of climate refugees from the Middle East jumping across the Red Sea into Ethiopia, Sudan, Egypt, for example, what would how well received would that be, or how much resistance would they? How would they be? Yeah, how would that go down? Do you think?
I think, well, we have a good example already. So the Ethiopia is actually one of the biggest globally where millions of refugees are here. Since 1991, Somalia didn't have a functioning government. So there are like the breakaway Somaliland and Puntland, but there has been like millions of Somali refugees and even Kenyans in Sudan as well. So yes, they get some financial support from the UN and the UNHCR, but yeah, I don't think even surprisingly, I have been seeing a lot of Syrian refugees here in Ethiopia. Ethiopia has been actually one of nicest countries welcoming refugees. There hasn't been much of complain. Yes, there are sometimes resources that they demand from international organizations where the burden can be shared, but and they also wonder how much more Ethiopia can take, because like I said, there are already, if I'm not wrong, about like 2 or 3 million refugees in Ethiopia and the south, mostly Somali refugees. So I think it would be great. It would be all right. I know Sudan has been a huge host of Ethiopian refugees whenever civil war breaks out. A lot of refugees have been. So there has been a support with each other, even though sometimes the resource strain that they try to get a resource from outside. But I think they wouldn't be resisting the way we see it in Europe, where they're closing their borders. I don't think that would be a big issue.
So if I can just expand on that, because the HOA is my one of my sub-regions. The Ethiopian Tigrayan war continues, albeit there seems to be a bit of a lull in it. There's about 65,000 refugees currently in eastern Sudan, predominantly Ethiopian, though there have been some claims of Eritreans. Generally, the region is a smorgasbord of nationalities or tribes, or however they tend to refer to themselves as nationalities. Turkey is already quite active there. They've got a space actual presence. They've actually got a launching pad, if whatever the word is, in Mogadishu, just outside Mogadishu in Somalia. And UAE has been investing heavily in Addis Ababa and a couple of other states around there for quite a while now. So the Islamic presence, if you want to call it that, is definitely growing in the HOA. And I think the area is really a bit of a hot topic, because it is where you see a quite clear line between the Islamic and Christian worlds of Africa begin and end. And so if you were to see a huge influx of Islamic communities coming, refugees, that could see, it depends how well the countries were prepared. Egypt and Sudan both have a water scarcity issue because of the Great Renaissance Dam on the Nile. And if that continues because of the war, then you could see that exacerbated. So it wouldn't be easy, but it's something that I hope we don't get to. But I think any mass amount of climate migration is not going to be good for any region, regardless of whether or not it's already got a pre-existing sort of relationship with the communities that would make up that set of refugees. That's just my thought.
You know what? I don't want to throw a turd in the punch bowl, but look, we know that anytime jobs for the natives or the locals, whatever you want to call it, indigenous groups, whatever country, look at history, you can go back as far as you want. If there is competition for survival and jobs in your state, in your kingdom, from people from the outside, there is discomfort. And that's long before climate change. So it just goes hyper. And if you want to look at Africa, look at South Africa with what they've been dealing with for years, because they have a strong economy and people from other parts of Africa going to South Africa. Look at the discrimination that happens with the African to African, Black African to Black African. The same thing happens in South America. So, I don't think there's a unicorn thing to this. So unless the existing population is comfortable with their living and their ability to live how they wish to live, anyone who comes in and disrupts it, and if there's a downturn, history shows the newcomer is always to blame.
Okay.
Tyler, Gerald, me, yeah, wow, love it. I would, it, Tyler, I dare to build a segue, yeah, to what you pinned up there. As you might know, I live in Germany, and of course, I've been following the building construction work of Nord Stream 2. Yes, of course, I expected, Putin as the spokesman to come up with this argument. But segue to tech. Yeah, I know it's not high tech, it's not chips, but we have to my knowledge, most modern gas pipeline that has ever been built, and it's filled with gas. It's ready to go. And my question here would be, Is it ideology or pragmatism that will win?
Okay. So I just did the air horn very quietly in the back there. And the first tech story today at 90 minutes, as Ken was correct to point out, 90 minutes of preamble today, almost a record, I think. The first story is that Netflix reports its second quarter
I
revenue.
did that. I did that at the very beginning of the room.
Yeah,
I don't think you
Ken
should go
covered that.
go over that again.
That
Yeah.
came
Ken
in like,
covered that. Yeah.
okay, great.
Yeah.
So then Netflix plans to launch a cheaper ad-supported plan. We already knew that. And then Google plans to test AR prototypes, augmented reality glasses prototypes, in public, starting with a few dozen employees and trusted testers in August and ramping up to hundreds by the end of 2022. Camera-enabled assistive glasses won't be able to take photos or videos, though, because that was pretty much all anyone could talk about on Google Glass version 1 was endless debates about rights of people with video and photo, and you're just the entire narrative gets utterly hijacked and focuses entirely on that, which is a shame because you should be focusing on everything else that is enabled by that technology. So I think it's kind of smart for them to remove the video and photo features from that so that people can think about what the technology really can offer. So then
So, Tyler, sorry to interrupt. I actually read through this article, and then there's actually a link in it to sign up to be a part of these public research initiatives. I'm not sure in what way, but there is a way to sort of sign up as sort of like not associated with Google. And so I sort of started filling it out because they want to know, like, are you a part of the public? Would you like be interested in being a part of this initiative and at least having some feedback on this? So if anyone's interested, it might be worthwhile to like fill that out.
okay, next up, U.S. lawmakers release internal Amazon, Facebook, and Google documents that they say show evidence of self-preferencing as they call for tougher tech antitrust laws. New internal documents released Tuesday detail how the three big companies give themselves a little bit of internal favoritism. You know, like when you look for maps, Google shows you Google Maps instead of MapQuest. Anyone even remember MapQuest? um, or they show you
It still
Google.
exists.
Does it? Google. I haven't seen it in a decade. Google reviews get shown instead of Yelp. Does anyone even remember Yelp? Just as easy off the top of my head examples, although there's endless examples, of course.
Tyler, people still look at Yelp. I know a lot of people still concerned about their Yelp ratings, and in fact, I think there's in fact, if Jennifer's, I don't know if Jennifer's on stage, but I mean, maybe it got covered in another room. But you know, I think there's a lawsuit going on now between Google and Facebook. Is it Google and is Facebook and Amazon? Excuse me, Facebook and Amazon, where Amazon wanted to sue Facebook about reviews, on its site, and they're claiming they have 230 protection, so go sue the people posting it on Facebook. But it's a similar issue for Yelp with reviews, that if all of a sudden the companies can start going after the reviewers, then that whole system doesn't exist. But a lot of people still use Yelp, and it's a thing.
Hey,
Okay.
Ken, can you go deeper, a little bit deeper into the reviews so people understand what you're talking about there, if
I'll,
you
I'll,
if you know what's going on with those?
we did it yesterday. Basically, Amazon suffers from a lot of fake reviews, which is a huge problem for Amazon because that's the foundation of why you go to Amazon to buy stuff, because there's reviews. That's their main value proposition. Otherwise, you'd go to YouTube where you could actually watch videos of the actual products, etc., etc. So the trustworthiness of the reviews is paramount to the success of the future, continued success of Amazon as a platform. So they take fake reviews very, very, very seriously, as they should. And the problem is people are using Facebook to create groups to pay for fake reviews. And that obviously upsets Amazon. And Amazon would love to tell Facebook, hey, Facebook, shut that shit down. And they have asked Facebook to do that. And Facebook says, go suck it. Because We don't have to do that. We are a platform, and the law says we're not responsible for what people say. Yeah, go have a fun one. Tough turtles. And then, so that's why Netflix is suing Facebook to try and get Facebook to be take the appropriate actions from their perspective, rather than try and hunt down all of these people individually, spearfishing each of them. They'd rather catch them with the big net with the assistance of Facebook, which they're not willing to do, hence the lawsuit. Okay, so the next topic is that Microsoft unveils something called Viva Engage, a social community launching in late August that brings stories and other image and video sharing tools to Microsoft Teams, their version of Zoom or Skype. Microsoft is adding Engage, other new Yammer-based app, to its Viva employee experience platform. Here's what it is and how. Okay, wonderful. So then the next is Google finds Android spyware distributed outside the Play Store that Russians disguised as an app for Ukrainians to launch DDoS attacks against Russian sites. So this is very clever. Let me unpack that for you. Google discovered that there was spyware apps being distributed outside of the Play Store. So these are mobile apps you download outside of Google Play Store, like off of a website, that came from Russia. And Russia very cleverly disguised these apps to be downloaded by Ukrainians because they want Ukrainians to download this app, because that would give them a backdoor into a whole bunch of Ukrainian properties from a digital perspective. And to do that, they had to disguise it. So what did they disguise it as? They disguised it as an app that would attack Russia. And they thought that's what Ukrainians would want to download. So they pretend, hey, download this app that attacks Russia, when in reality, it's a Russian app that's meant to attack Ukrainians. If you get the idea there. Very clever. Next is the Delaware courts that are dealing with the Elon Musk Twitter lawsuit. Grants Twitter an expedited 5-day trial in October, which Ken told us about yesterday. So we'll just keep going. Google and Oracle report some of their cloud services and servers in the UK went offline due to cooling failures amid the country's record-breaking heat wave. So there you have it. Key internet infrastructure going down due to, if you want to call it climate change related tech vulnerability. That's kind of interesting to me. How will our technologies withstand nature when nature gets extreme? Yes, and the most every Swede knows what I'm thinking about next, which is Sweden became cashless, and in fact, you cannot pay with cash nearly anywhere, even if you wanted to, even if you insisted, and including places like Burger King and Starbucks and public toilets and everywhere. Sweden is utterly cashless. And what happens, when the cashless system is, not working due to similar situations? It's a